People, I love it. Yeah, it's Quake Day, Monday or Tuesday, sorry. Yeah, it shook so hard I can't keep track. I am so excited to have this guy on with us. We have, me first, before I intro him, we get into a good conversation with him, mention that David K. Johnston joins after 11 o'clock. We'll talk about the J6 committee, referrals, and beyond, what to expect next. Raj Mathai from NBC Bay Area. He is the OG of this show. I'm so excited to have him in. He will join around 11:35, so much to do. But now, a guy who shares my name but has a much richer career history, and I don't just mean money. What a great life and bunch of experiences in a life have been compiled in this new book by Mark Thompson. Yeah, the book is called Don't Bump the Record, My Adventures with Mark and Brian. Mark, one half of the Mark and Brian team that was dominant in Los Angeles. I mean, they really reached the apex of radio. They were syndicated, and then they got a TV show. We'll talk about that. But such a cool guy, too. And, in addition to the radio, he's acted, he's produced, he's done a bunch of stuff. So really cool to have him here. And please, a warm welcome for Mark Thompson, everybody. Yeah.
I don't know if I can handle two of you guys. I don't know.
Right.
That's crazy.
Right. Absolutely. Mark, it was such a surprise and a joy to have you on KFI with Tim Conway Jr. I didn't know you were going to be there. I had a blast with you two.
Yeah, it was really fun. It gave me the thought to get you on here, really. So thanks, right back at you. And this book that you have, it's really cool. You've seen it even in your career, the way that things have changed, that you can self-publish, you can reach the people who are curious about your life. In your case, it's quite a substantial group of people who are curious, myself among them. And you had a big, I think, a release party in L.A. In fact, because we share the same name, people were contacting me saying, wow, love seeing Donny Osmond at your thing. And I'm thinking, I don't know what thing I had, man, but Donny Osmond wasn't there. I wish. But that was your release party, your book release party, right?
It was, Mark, it was amazing. I've been, like you, I've been on many stages throughout my career. And one of the reasons that actors who start on the stage and then move on to movies and television wind up going back to the stage in some form, because miraculous things can happen where emotion that's taking place on stage filters into the room. And in this particular case, it remained there because everything that was happening on stage was from the heart. In the Christmas season, giving all of the money to puppies and kittens and trying to do a good thing. And people are still vibrating from what took place on that stage. It was a wonderful, wonderful kickoff to this book.
You had events like that, as I recall, when you were doing Mark and Brian on KLOS in Los Angeles. Isn't that right?
It is. And this was kind of built by me in a way to commemorate those Mark and Brian Christmas shows. It was a must go to. Tickets were in limited form and free to the listener, but impossible to get unless you got them from us. And we would have some of the biggest names of the day come and perform at these Christmas shows. So this thing that I just described at the Saban was built in the nature of that, in the same vein, in the same heart as those. And yeah, it was as emotional, if not more so, than the old Mark and Brian Christmas shows.
So let's just fill everybody in a little bit for people who are just getting up to speed. Your life in radio, you can take us to, it's great that you chronicled it the way you have, but just in the shorthand of this conversation, take us quickly to Los Angeles and the explosion of your career in Mark and Brian.
Yeah, Brian and I hooked up in Birmingham for the first part of our career, and it was an immediate success. We raced to #1 in a smaller market. That's understandable. And we were being courted by the kind of cities you would think, Atlanta, St. Louis, cities like that, the obvious jump from a Birmingham. But in the middle of that, Los Angeles called. And that's a pretty massive jump. For us, and we knew that we were under the gun. Many didn't give us a chance, wondering who are these guys. And we got to LA, and we did what it was that we were doing in Birmingham, but something happened to us being in that city. We became a better version of ourselves in that we were doing the kind of morning radio that nobody had ever heard, including us. We were kind of doing whatever came up, and it was unlike anything that anybody had ever witnessed before. And the success was immediate and quick. And it was a little scary because, you know, I went into LA thinking I just want to do well enough to stay here. Really. And the thing just exploded, which is going to happen when you have a situation where it's a lot of the same old thing. And all of a sudden, this completely new, different thing comes in, and everybody's attracted to that. And that's what happened to us.
Yeah, and I want to, in a moment, get to where the kind of, you know, you guys were white hot, and then you started taking incoming fire a little bit from the next new thing. But before I get to that, when I want to remind people that when Mark Thompson first got to L.A. with Mark and Brian, he. I'm trying to remember. The market was Rick Dees, right? And you talk about that in your book, right? Rick Dees was the guy. Yeah,
Rick was the king. Rick was, first of all, one of the biggest names I'd ever uttered. And in fact, I was doing an interview with the Los Angeles Times before I left Birmingham to come to L.A. And in the middle of this mundane query, this reporter, it was almost as though he lost a bet that he would have to interview a morning show that thinks they're going to come to LA and take it over. And he kind of metaphorically dropped his pen in the middle of the interview. And he said to me, "Do you realize Rick Dees is here?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And Rick was the master of setup, punchline records, setup, punchline commercial. He was the king. And if we had tried to come in and compete with that by telling jokes like Rick did, we would have lost handily because no one is as good at that form of morning radio than Rick Dees. As I said earlier, we were a complete 180. We didn't have punchlines. We did scenarios that were funny. We were kind of very heavily, let me take out kind of. We were very heavily influenced by David Letterman, both of us, where he did everything differently from what Johnny Carson did. And that's kind of what we were. We did everything different than Rick Dees. And that was what made us happen so quickly, because we very quickly became the #1 classic rock morning show. But listeners from shows like Rick started to come over and check it out because they had heard the talk.
It was a dominant show. And it seemed as though it was a meteoric rise. How long did it take for you to kind of get to that peak?
Well, to the peak, we debuted September of 1987. We were #1 in April of 1989.
That to me is just extraordinary. I mean, to build that kind of audience. It's
ridiculous to happen in Los Angeles, a city that size, a city of this market size. It just doesn't.
And with so many choices. I mean, as you say, it's so big. They've got so many choices.
It just doesn't. It happens in small markets. We've all seen it. Smaller cities. Somebody comes in, they're real good. They're #1 forever. Honestly, I had never seen it, and that was the part that I kind of didn't trust it because of my history in radio. I've seen what ratings do, up, down, on a whim. And so with the kind of numbers we were getting, it was meteoric, and that was the part of it I just didn't trust.
Well, I want to come back and continue with this. Don't bump the record, kid. We'll talk to you about the title as well. My Adventures with Mark and Brian. But what I want to get to is then that incredible heat and some of the immense access you had as a result of that, and all the people who visited your show was extraordinary. And then a TV show, and how you feel that the TV show actually left a stink on you that changed you. It changed the perception of Mark and Brian. So I want to get to all of that as we continue. Mark Thompson, yes. He is with us, and we continue our conversation next.
The Mark Thompson Show.
All right, now I want to talk to Steve Moskowitz. What up, Steve Moskowitz? I was just talking to Steve. You're muted.
You're
I think
muted.
there you are. Yeah, I was just talking.
How
to,
about now?
Now you sound great. I was talking to everybody about you and all the various advantages that you don't even realize you have. You think of the government as a big bad thing, or, you know, at least when it comes to taxes, you think of it that way, potentially. And you don't realize that there are opportunities the government offers you. I like, that's what I've learned in our, our conversations. We visited ERC repeatedly, but that's because that's a real program that you may be eligible for in ways you don't think you are.
Absolutely. And there's so many things. For example, here's another common thing that comes up. Somebody will ask us to do their tax return, and they're a landlord. And I'll say, so do you hold the rental property in your own name, or do you have it in an entity like an LLC? And they say, oh, they hold it in their own name. I say, uh-oh. Do you realize if your tenant gets rip-roaring drunk, falls down, breaks his back, becomes a quadriplegic, you know what he's going to do? He's going to sue you, and he's going to say, well, the reason he broke his back is not because he was rip-roaring drunk, but because you, the evil landlord, didn't properly maintain the floor. And a jury might say, well, landlords are inherently evil, so let's give the plaintiff everything he's asking for. One lawsuit, Mark, in excess of your insurance, can wipe out a lifetime of earnings and savings and ruin your life. Hulk Hogan faced that. He was being sued like that. Hulk Hogan's kid borrowed Hulk's car with Hulk's permission, picked up the kid's friend. The kid drove the car into a tree. Hulk's kid gets out of the car unscratched. The other kid's a paraplegic, and they did sue Hulk for everything that he had. So what happens is we say, well, okay, you don't want to own this property in your own name. We'll set it up in an LLC. And then what happens if you get sued? Your max loss is the equity of the LLC. All your other assets are safe. Now, suppose you had 10 properties. You don't put the 10 properties in 10 LLCs. You want to set up a separate entity for each one, because if you get sued, you only want to lose the one entity that's in the entity, not multiple properties. So you say, well, wait, but here's where a little tax procedure comes in. You pay the state of California $800 a year franchise fee for the privilege of being an LLC. So $800 a year, okay. But if you had 10, that's $8,000 a year, and you might say, hey, that's getting a little pricey here. How much insurance could I buy for that? So instead, in that example, we would set up one LLC and 9 LPs, limited partnerships. There's no franchise fee with them. So you have the 10 entities, and it still just costs you $800 in total. There's just so much that when we talk to somebody, it's, oh, they don't even think about it. I just called to do my tax return. Well, wait a minute. I didn't even think about that rental property. Boy, you may have just saved my life.
Yeah, the truth is that this is what I was saying before. There are just so many things to know. And as both a tax CPA and tax attorney, you just have such expertise in so many different ways. It's terrific that you are aware of all these intricacies and that your people can help with any situation across the country, not just around the Bay Area. So reach Steve Moskowitz at 888-TAX-DEAL, 888-TAX-DEAL. I mean, every time we speak with him, there are more revelations, and he can help you regardless of your situation. Small business, medium-sized business, you may be a sole proprietor, or you may be an individual filing a tax return. 888-TAX-DEAL, 888-TAX-DEAL, or MoskowitzLLP.com. Steve, thanks so much. Great to talk to you.
Always
Steve
a pleasure,
Moskowitz,
Tim. Mark, thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah, all right.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Back to our conversation with Mark Thompson, who is
the Mark Thompson.
The Mark. I consider him the Mark Thompson from Mark and Brian. His book, which chronicles a lot of stuff. I'm trying to cram some of it in here. This brief conversation is called "Don't Bump the Record, Kid: My Adventures with Mark and Brian." And we got a bunch in the chat saying they're going to buy the book. So I already feel that. This has been a good visit for you, Mark Thompson.
Yeah, it's worth it.
That's worked out. Yeah. So Mark Thompson, we talked about you coming into Los Angeles, the new thing, Rick Dees being dominant, but ultimately you guys achieved #1 status with Mark and Brian. Through that show came everybody. I remember Brian, dating starlets and being very high profile, and there was sort of a, you caught the Hollywood glitter, it seemed, and things were going really well.
Yes.
And you even got a TV show on
Yes.
NBC.
Yep.
And it's tough to conceive that that TV show was anything but good. But you write about the fact that it was everything bad when it came out.
It wasn't presented to me in, look, we all know this. When you've got heat, everybody wants a part of it. The networks lined up, NBC, ABC, CBS, all of them wanting us to do something with them. And that's understandable and flattering. And we went with NBC because it was going to be an unscripted kind of roll off the tip of your tongue kind of an event for both Brian and I. And we liked our chances. And we were in the middle of shooting. And I have to go back and give you, Brian and I, Mark and Brian had become the bad boys of radio. We did things and said things that other people just don't do. We didn't mean to throw Christmas trees off the roof of the building into oncoming traffic and cause the cops to come. We didn't mean to drill a hole in the parking lot to plant a tree to celebrate Arbor Day. We didn't mean to get kicked out of Graceland for life, but we did. And so we're about 6 episodes into shooting this Adventures of Mark and Brian when it was told to me that our night was going to be Sunday nights at 7. And I very loudly said, we're up against 60 minutes. And it was explained to me at that time that the network wanted to dent the ratings of 60 minutes, and they were hoping that the kids could get the remote out of dad's hand and control the television. And I then realized that the reason that when I would watch the edited versions of our shows, that the editors did not include any of the most hysterical stuff that we were doing because it was PG-13. This was a children's show. And if NBC had said to me at the beginning, we're looking for 2 hosts for a kid's show, I would have very quickly said, that's not who we are. Mm-hmm. And the show came out and it was well liked by some, but it was an abysmal failure as far as ratings. They, at that time, were 105 network shows on the air. We came in at 103 on our debut. And at one point, we were number 105. And when it ended, it was just an abysmal failure. There was nothing about it that was bright, and we were left holding the bag. But shortly after that, Howard Stern came in and began his attack on us. And I truly believe that the PR that we were left with after a failed children's show that we hosted, it's not what we meant to do, but that's what we did. I think before that, as far as street cred, we were James Dean. After that, we were Captain Kangaroo. And when Howard came in and began making his boast that we stole his act and we were losers and liars and posers, it was easy for listeners to believe because we were not, I believe, what they thought we were because of that television show. Or it could also be, Mark, that it's what I said earlier. If you're lucky enough in the world of entertainment to get your 15 minutes of fame, enjoy it while you're there. And save your money because you're going to need it. At some point, the next pretty face, the next new thing is going to come along and people will go to it. And I think that there's a big part of that as well. We had our joyous 5-6 years. It was time for us to sit down.
So well said. It strikes me that it was quite the car crash that you could hear when Stern got to town and started hounding you guys. And you did, I thought, the right thing by not necessarily engaging him. I remember Jay Thomas was on the air at the same time, and he took him on. And, that was more Jay. Jay would really wants to get in your face. I thought you guys, as did I. But so that was that. I wanted to ask you about before in our last few minutes with Mark Thompson. Again, Don't Bump the Record Kid, My Adventures with Mark and Brian. First, the title comes from?
You'll enjoy it. When I was a kid, the local radio station was WOWL. They were great. The jocks were hellions and just really partiers, and they talked about it on the air. And I loved my big guy was Christopher J. Ballou. He did afternoons. He was just raucous and awesome, and I loved him. And I went up to the lobby of the radio station to try to meet him, and they would always kick me out I'd ride my bike up. And they started promoting that Christopher J. Ballou was going to broadcast from a shopping center live. And this is when the jock would bring literally the turntables and the microphone, the whole get up and play it, live from the thing. So I rode my bike up. There's a sizable crowd, and there he is. There's my hero. He's right there. And without realizing, I started walking toward him. And I got up right next to the console, and he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Hey, don't bump the record, kid. Back up. and those were the first words uttered to me by my hero, but it didn't matter what he said. It was my hero, and he said it to me. So that had to be the title of the book.
Did you ever try to reconnect with him, like call him or find him or
Steve?
No?
5 years from that moment when he said that, I became a jock at WOWL and worked alongside him.
Oh, cool.
I never told him that
great.
story, but for the first time, I watched Christopher work. I watched him prepare for his show, and it was in that moment that I realized this is not magic. He works at it. He's in there preparing hours he puts into whatever he's going to do on that show. And I registered that. This isn't happenstance. This guy busts his ass to make that show good. And I then realized this is the way you do it.
I have a question for you about your partner.
What, Kim? What is it?
Once the show is over, do you guys maintain that kind of best friend thing you had going on the show?
Well, this is exactly what I wanted to get to anyway, so go. Yeah. That's
and also, once you're off the air and your identity is kind of, entrenched in what you did for a living, how do you separate that? Those are two different questions, but
well,
I have to ask them all at once. Otherwise, Mark Thompson's like, yeah, no.
We don't have a lot of time, so do answer the first one. Answer the first one. We'll see if there's time for the second one.
Okay. Well, the first answer, Kim, is that in the beginning, it's like a marriage. For the first 7 years, it was glorious. I mean, we were linked at the hip. It didn't matter if we were on the air, off the air. We were chatting about stupid stuff we could do and looked forward to throwing that together and putting it on the air. And then with fame, success, money, and then losing that, it affects the relationship just like it does in a marriage. David Lee Roth said something. He was on the show once, and he told a story about working with people for long periods of time. And he said, we would be in another hotel in another city on a tour, and we're sitting in the room. We're all eating room service. And I would look over at Eddie, and I would say, you know what, man? I hate the way you chew. And that really... That is like a marriage. Because that's what it is. It's true. Familiarity breeds contempt. And after a while, Brian and I just simply hated the way each other chewed.
Right.
Absolutely wild. Well, what was the second question? Whether or not his identity being associated with the show, Mark and Brian?
Yeah. I mean, with him, he kind of carries that with him. But I think for a lot of people, as we found, when your radio station ends, as mine recently did, and you try to reinvent yourself, but you carry that, your identity is tied in with your career when really you're much more than that. But it's just kind of hard to find your way. So I'm just wondering how that worked for you.
I'm assuming you're meaning after it ended or while it was going on?
After it ended.
Look, I approached what I did, my on-the-air persona was exactly who I am.
Right.
I am a human being that's married. My wife terrifies me. I screw up constantly with my kids, and I don't want her to find out about it because she'll kill me. And I shared that on the air. I was very clear throughout these meteoric successes that we were having. I was very clear of who I was. I never forgot that. I shared that on the air. And so really what I did when it all came to an end is I just continued being a better version of who I was that entire time. I never let the success or the money or the fame define me as to who I thought I was. I was clear about that.
I would so like the success or the money or the fame to define me, Mark Thompson. I wish I had a chance to have the success, the money, and the fame and see whether it would define me.
Why are you yelling?
I just feel as though that's a shot I wanted. Anyway, it's great that you're so well adjusted. You're so talented. We share a pal, Kevin Pollak. And on many a time I've talked to Pollock about the fact that I just think you're so much more than a radio guy. It's so funny that Kim mentions that, the association with Mark and Brian, and clearly that was the one that was, the extraordinary thing that it probably enabled so many other things. But you have real gifts as an actor and producer and director and that stuff. So
thank you, Mark. And being that Kevin, we both know him extremely well. Kevin said something to me that I've never forgotten because it cracked me up. Kevin was visiting me at my home in North Carolina. We're walking around, we're hanging out, and Kevin looked at me and he said, "You know what? If I had your money, I would simply burn mine."
Yeah. Ain't it the truth? It's been good. Life's been good to Mark Thompson. So you can read Mark Thompson's book, Don't Bump the Record, Kid, My Adventures with Mark and Brian. There's so much more in this book. Great stories of, celebrities. There's a tremendous story about Lionel Richie. There's go ahead, Mark. You want to say something? What's that?
Just one last thing. We're having massive sales in the audiobook. The audiobook, I narrate it, we scored it with music, and we drop clips of the actual Mark and Brian program into it. So the audiobook is easily gotten, as are all the other versions, by going to our website, myadventureswithmarkandbrian.com. Make your purchase and enjoy. All money goes to puppies and kittens in Southern California.
Aww,
so cool. Yeah, so cool. Good luck with the book. I love that you were here. Thank you so much, Mark Thompson. Stay in touch if you will.